Cashflow Diary Podcast, episode 579.
Welcome to yet another exciting episode of the Cashflow Diary Podcast, the podcast that teaches you insider tips, tactics, and strategies for creating leverage streams of cash flow into your life. Learn from top-performing entrepreneurs, business owners, investors, and thought leaders from across the globe as they share their secrets to success. Like what you learn on this and other Cashflow Diary podcast episodes? Go to learninvestingnow.com and sign up to receive powerful tips and information that will help you succeed as an entrepreneur and investor. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, educator, speaker, author, and master facilitator of Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow game, Jay Massey.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Cashflow Diary Podcast. I'm your host, Jay Massey, and I'm glad that you are here today because as you and I go out there to build our cash flow, one of the things that you begin to understand, and relatively quickly, you wake up one day, you're inspired with an idea, or maybe you got frustrated one day at work and you're like, you know what, that's it. I'm going to go out there and make my business happen. My idea is worth it. Quickly, you are smacked in the face with an understanding that you do not possess every skill that you need in order to make your idea, your business grow. It doesn't take very long for us entrepreneurs to understand that there's something we don't know, and there's a lot of it, and that we need assistance in understanding all of the new things, whether that be marketing, whether that be sales, whether that be some sort of technical ability. All of us are lacking skills in something that require us to become a bigger, better version of ourselves so that our idea, our product, our passion can come to life. I have with me today none other than Jonathan Levi. And here's the thing. He's mastered the art of learning, which is exactly what I get excited about. I mean, I had one of my mentors say to me once, he's like, Jay, your super skill is that you've learned how to learn. I had no idea what he meant by that. And now I get a chance to possibly unpack that a little bit because Jonathan has done exactly that. In fact, he is known. In fact, many of you may know him for his course, Become a SuperLearner or Superhuman Academy, or his podcast, the Superhuman Academy podcast. Interestingly, he's now written a book, The Only Skill That Matters. We're definitely going to find out what that is. But right now, what's important is that you get ready to listen, learn, and love Jonathan. Jonathan, how you doing?
I'm fantastic, Jay. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad that you are here because you actually represent a topic that's interesting to me. I mean, the skill of learning is kind of unique. And yes, I want to talk all about that. But this being the first time that you're here, I have to ask you the same question that, that I ask everybody else the first time that they're here. So you ready?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. I tend to look at today's entrepreneurs a lot like yesterday's superheroes, like Black Widow, Hulk, Wolverine, etc. Because I think entrepreneurs and superheroes have a ton of things in common. For example, as a superhero, I can imagine myself, flying around town, using my powers, saving our customers one sale at a time. But also, superheroes have a beginning. If you think about Spider-Man, for example, there was a time where he was just a kid going to school, doing his thing, not paying much attention to anybody other than Mary Jane, taking some photos. Then one day he gets bit by a spider, discovers, oh my goodness, I have a superhuman ability. And now he has to choose. Do I use this for good or for evil? So my question to you is as follows. Before Superhuman Academy, before your podcast, before becoming a SuperLearner, before understanding that you had this special skill, and even before all of your books, including The Only Skill That Matters, what we want to know is, who is Jonathan Levi?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Jonathan Levi is a kid who grew up in Silicon Valley and always was meant to be an entrepreneur, although I think he didn't realize it at first. a kid who was bright but struggled to learn the way that other people seemed to learn in the classroom or outside of the classroom. And just someone who's passionate about building things, honestly. Recently, I've been working with a coach to just rediscover my own passion in my own business, because I think, as you know, Jay, it's a lot more fun to start businesses than grow them or manage them for those of us who are entrepreneurs and quick starts. And I've really started to identify with this title of the fact that I'm a maker, I'm a creator, I'm someone who loves to build stuff and solve problems. And fortunately for me, my whole business is around solving people's problems and helping them get to that next level, as I'm sure you can relate to as well. So, I'm an eclectic, I'm a weirdo, I'm a 8 quick start on the Kolbe scale, which I imagine most of your audience is around there as well. And I'm just a passionate learner as well. I'm someone who really believes that learning is the most important thing a human being can do. And I try to live that every single day. And I'm also a dedicated husband and son.
I like it. Yes. It's funny that you mention the Kolbe because in my head, I when I first took that, I was like, oh, cool, I got a 10. What does that mean?
And it told you, congratulations, you got a perfect score on the Kolbe, right?
Right. That's kind of what it is. So I often take our staff through that process to help them understand that this is just how I function. And you guys are here to balance the rest of this crazy, because I will create a mess and start 12 things at once, because that's just how I'm built, and it's fun that way. But you said something that I want to unpack and understand a little bit. You said you struggled to learn the way other people seem to learn. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, I think I knew, and my parents knew, that I was a fairly bright kid. I mean, I grew up speaking 2 languages, and I could hold a conversation, and I had hobbies and stuff. But when it came to the classroom, I struggled a lot. One of my first memories from school was learning to read the hands-on clock, and all the other kids got it. And I had to go in at lunch and at recess because I just couldn't, it wasn't clicking for me. And that kind of continued with a ton of other skills in school. I couldn't pay attention in class, and I couldn't learn the way that I was expected to learn sitting still in a classroom and being talked at. So, the only way I got through high school and university was I had to be medicated just to sit through the curriculum. And I came to learn eventually, thank goodness, that the problem isn't me. The problem is the way that we learn. No one learns effectively. Some people can cope better than I can, certainly, but no one learns effectively being talked at or reading boring textbooks. We learn effectively by training our minds and actually learning how to use them properly.
Got it. No, and just so that I make sure I heard that correctly, you said you had to be medicated? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I was on prescription ADD medication for most of my young life. Again, just to be able to sit through class, just to be able to keep up. And it didn't help me with my memory, as anyone who has taken these drugs will tell you. It doesn't make you smarter. It just allows you to kind of sit still and pay attention, and it gets rid of some of that 8 quick start. But, the sin of it was that I still forgot everything the minute I left the exam room, like everyone does, every student out there does. I got really lucky. When I got accepted to business school, I knew that my old trick of just taking a whole bunch of medication and catching up with what everyone else had been able to understand in class, I knew that wasn't going to work, because I had to network and build relationships and go to all kinds of events. And along about that time, I was doing an internship before I actually started business school, because I went to a condensed program that wouldn't have me do an internship, so I figured I'd make my own. And I went and worked in a VC firm, and I got really lucky. I encountered someone who, he and his wife had developed a methodology for speed reading and memory and accelerated learning, and they've been teaching it to kids with learning disabilities, like ADD. That was a total shut up and take my money moment. I was like, whatever it costs, I'll come to you, you come to me, but teach me how to do this, because it was the first time you talked about superheroes, Jay. It was the first time I'd ever met a human being who had a real life superpower. Like, I've always been, like yourself, I've always been obsessed with this idea of superpowers. And, I thought it was so cool that Superman had super strength. And when I was 5 years old, I spent like hours sitting there trying to develop telekinesis. Told you I was a pretty weird kid. But this was the first time I actually discovered a real human who had a superpower. And it was that they could leap tall bounds of books in a single sitting and memorize just massive amounts of information. Now, back then I had not been exposed to the World Memory Championships or any of the Guinness World Record holders that I now know as friends. I thought it was just so amazing. I was like, this guy can memorize 50 people's names just by hearing them once. And it was like mind-blowing to me. And it took me down this path. It also introduced me to a lot of mysticism and meditation and things like that, because I started wondering, like, okay, if there are real world superpowers out there, what else can this crazy thing called the human brain do? And that's part of what sent me down this journey of my podcast, Superhuman Academy, was I wanted to figure out how many more real life superhumans are out there, and if I could learn to do what they do. Now, since then, I've had the opportunity to meet people and interview people like Wim Hof, who's done crazy superhuman stuff, Dean Karnazes. I mean, again, real life superhumans. And again and again and again, the message that they tell us, whether it's memory champions, people who run ultra marathons every day for a year, the message that they always tell us is like, anyone could do what I do. It's just techniques and practice. And I think that's such an empowering thing.
What's interesting is as I'm listening to you, there's a lot of your life experience that mirrors my own, to some degree, unsurprisingly. But there was two things that you said that I was like, that I thought was interesting, because you used the word lucky in and of itself, which I often shy away from using. Because you said you were lucky in who it is that you met, but was it really luck, or was it more that it kind of should have happened, in the sense that you were putting yourself in a situation for things like that to happen?
Yeah, I definitely believe you make your own luck. But I did a podcast interview yesterday where we went on this huge tangent about just privilege, right? Like, it's very easy for me to say you make your own luck because I was born a man in a Western country. My skin is white. I'm heterosexual. Like, I'm playing life on easy mode. So I always try to honor the role of luck, call it what you want to call it, right? Luck, privilege, blessings. I have all of them in spades. And at the same time, I've had my fair share of hardship. I contemplated suicide the first time when I was 13, and it continued for many, many years to contemplate it. History of depression. So I think we all have blessings and we all have things working against us. But yeah, I try to, every single day I journal about the things that I'm blessed to have and the things that I'm grateful to have, because I try to acknowledge and be outwardly cognizant of the fact that I have a lot of blessings and there is a lot of luck, divine providence, again, call it what you want to call it, involved in my story.
Yeah, no doubt. And I can only agree with you, because those things happen. But I think there's also that part of all of us where we've prepared ourselves to be able to, I've often stated, it's one thing to be in the right place at the right time, but you were prepared through a lot of those hardships, I think, to also be the right person. Does that make sense?
True. Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm a big believer in the law of attraction and everything, and that you can will things into your life. But, as the saying goes, the law of attraction only works when you implement the law of action first. It's like you can conjure things, people, mentors, ideas, resources, money, all these things you can conjure into your life, but it's not going to happen sitting on the couch, right? I'll give you a perfect example, which also has to do with learning, right? I was single for 9 years, and part of that was because I was in a pretty unhealthy relationship prior to that, and it left some scars and wounds that I think I didn't realize how serious they were. But eventually I turned 30 years old and I said, enough. Like, I want to be a dad. I want to be a husband. I want to have love in my life. And so I decided to make a change beyond scrolling through Tinder. And, as my buddy Joe Polish always says, that the time to stop working is when working stops working. It's like whatever I was working at, whether it was, Tinder, going to bars, like none of that was working. So I decided to treat it as a learning challenge, right? So I implemented the law of attraction, and I journaled about the woman that I wanted to find, and I did a vision board, and I did all that other stuff. But I also implemented the law of action, and I started doing a lot of self-work and going to coaches and counselors and learning about, what it takes to be in a healthy relationship, and learning about what it takes to attract a healthy relationship. And at the end of, I think it must have been about 6 months, I met my now wife. And it ultimately came, when I say learning is the only skill that matters, I mean it. Like, there are very few things in this world that I believe you can't achieve through learning. Dunking a basketball might be one of them if you're like me and you're 5'9" on your best day. But the rest of them, whether you want to start a business, whether you want to expand your business into new segments, whether you want to get that next job, that next promotion, get accepted to that great school, create a family, be a great dad. I mean, I could just go on and on and on, play musical instruments, pick up a new hobby or language, heal past traumas. I view it all as learning. And I've proven this to myself time and time again. A year ago, I knew nothing about real estate investment. It was this big, scary thing that I knew I should be doing, yet I didn't know. In a couple of weeks, knock on wood, I'm currently in escrow on a $3 million commercial property.
Awesome.
Pretty good, pretty good for 1 year of learning and leveraging. And so, I have a belief that whatever challenge you're facing in life, the difference between excitement and anxiety is just knowledge.
I like how you said that for sure. My friends, associates, especially my wife, make fun of me because they're like, anytime like I encounter something that I don't know, they're like, we know that if we just give you like 3 days or something, you're gonna go study it, come back and be like the master and start teaching it. And they make fun. I'm like, what are you talking about? I don't understand. But like you, I like learning, so it's a very attractive thing. And by the way, dunking a basketball is absolutely fun. And I know that might not be an experience you've yet had, but it is fun. I'm telling you, there's nothing like it. But
you think if you can tell me I can learn it? I've been saying that for years. Like, it's a funny joke we use in our marketing materials. Like, we'll teach you how to learn anything except dunking and basketball. But if you tell me there's a possibility, Jay, I might come out there, man, and train with you, and I'll prove that you literally can learn anything.
Yeah, well, you can. And the question really becomes if Spud Webb, one of the shortest individuals in the NBA ever, to play, could figure it out, so can you. It can be done. However,
you make a point.
Is it worth the time, the effort, the energy? I don't know. That's a whole nother story. But yes, it can be done. It has been done. That's a non-issue. But what I'm interested in, though, is that there had to be this time. I want to know about it's what I like to call that superhero moment, that awakening, that moment at which you realize I have a superpower. and I should share it with other people, because for many who are listening, they feel like they have something special. They want to, they think other people will benefit from it, but they don't necessarily take that extra step to begin sharing it. And you did. I want to hear about what was that transformation like, and decision like, and like the first time you hit publish on that course where you're like, oh boy.
Yeah, it's actually a really funny story. And I kind of believe, like, we're marketers and we're entrepreneurs, and everyone has their kind of hero's journey, right? And so we go back and we arrange. It's kind of like Steve Jobs said, you can only arrange the points looking backwards. So we go back and we arrange the story, and we pull out these key moments that were like, in my book, I talk about the moment where the principal came into the classroom, and it's a true story, and just scoffed at me, because I was trying to learn something during silent sustained reading. And he was like, you're never going to be able to learn that. You're the dumbest kid in the class, in not so many words. But in reality, I think, like, it's never one moment, right? It's a series of moments that culminate in that big moment. And so my moments were obviously struggling a lot throughout my academic career, whether it was before medication, after medication, even on medication. I had to change my major 3 times at Berkeley because I couldn't keep up with the workload. I couldn't keep up with the workload in anthropology. Like, what does that say, right, about my academic skills at the time? But one of the big moments, a couple of the big moments were in business school. I had a lot of these very funny encounters where, we'd be in a group and they'd pass out the case study, and we'd all be like, all right, let's spend 20 minutes reading it. And then I'd read it because I'd been trained in speed reading, and I'd close the page and people would be like, come on, man, read the case. And I'm like, I read the case. Or there was an exam where I left an hour before the deadline. And people were like, oh man, why'd you give up on the exam, man? I was like, I didn't give up, I finished. So there were a lot of those instances, and people would come up to me and say, hey, can I take you to lunch? And can you explain to me the speed reading thing? Which made me realize that there was something there. Now, I actually didn't plan for online courses to be my business. It's funny saying it now with almost 300,000 enrollments. Right. I had a startup idea out of business school that I was really excited about, passionate about. And so for the last semester of business school and 6 months after, I just worked on that. I checked out of my studies and just focused on that. And it didn't work out. And I thought, okay, cool. I'm going to move to Israel and look for the next opportunity. I wanted to do something maybe with the base of pyramid. I wanted to do something involving social good, right? So the startup idea had been involving kind of charity and getting companies to engage with charity in more public ways. I thought to myself, I'll go to Israel. There's a lot of Israeli entrepreneurs doing really cool stuff in East Africa because of the proximity. Started interviewing co-founders, checking out companies, doing EIR, entrepreneur in residence roles. And I thought to myself, when I moved here, I kind of calculated, what do I need to live? I'd sold a business before, so I had money coming in every month from that. And I had a house that I bought and ended up not living in because I didn't get into Stanford MBA, which turned out to be a blessing in disguise. So I had some income, and I figured all I need is an extra $1,000. Now, when I've been doing the startup, I actually took a course online called 1 Month Rails by a guy named Matan Griffel and another guy named Chris Castiglione, both of whom have since become friends of mine. And I remember I paid $50 for this course, and I get into the course, and it's really good. It's really valuable. I'm learning a little bit on how to code, and I see in the comments, there's 2,500 comments from people. I was like, holy, you do the math, right? Wow, these people are making a great living. And they talked about how they'd had one of the most popular courses of all time on a platform called Udemy, which I'd never heard of. So I kind of filed that in the back of my head, went off to Israel, and I had this, okay, if I can figure out a way to make an extra $1,000 a month, I'll have what I called at the time infinite runway. Right? I'll never have to make a decision based on money. If it takes me 6 weeks, 6 months, or 6 years to find the next big idea that I want to work on, that's cool. Publish the course, I skipped this step there. I didn't know anything about creating online courses whatsoever. I'd only taken one online course in my life, and it was Matan's course in programming. So I treated it as a learning challenge, right? I sat down, I opened up like 45 tabs in my browser. I spent a weekend and I just like read like, okay, how do you design courses? How do you design learning material? What makes good courses? How do you win in these marketplace websites and get your stuff to the top? How do you record videos? Like, do I need a microphone? Do I, the first course was pretty bad. I figured out that I could just paint a blanket up on the wall, put a plastic bag over a desk lamp to soften the light, and put this kind of MVP online. And in the first 4 days, I put it out December 26th, figuring people were on Christmas break, they'd have time to take the course. So the first 4 days, we made $543. I was like, that's pretty solid. That's really good. So I decided I would join some of my friends from business school the next week and go on a ski trip. So I didn't check for about a week. I come back, and we'd already made, in the first week of January, about $1,200. And I was like, that's awesome. I hit my goal. Back to the ski slopes. And then that first month, we made $2,500. And then I say we as if there was a we. At the time, it was just me. This was before I even hired an assistant.
Right.
And then after that, it became 5 a month and 10 a month, and then it went gangbusters. And so slowly but surely, I decided to make this a full-time business. I released another course that did really well. Decided it would be really cool to do a podcast and get to learn from other people and interview people. And it's just been this gradual progression up into the point where now I think we're 10 people full-time, about 8 people part-time and freelancer, and 280-something customers, 280-something thousand customers worldwide. So kind of a crazy journey.
No doubt. No doubt. What it comes down to is you go as far as you can see, and when you get there, you see further, and you've done that expertly, which is great. Now, one of the things that I want to understand, I guess, is your book, The Only Skill That Matters. I mean, listening to you, in my head, it comes up as, okay, learning is the only skill that matters. Is that it? And if so, why do you say so?
Yeah, I certainly believe it is the only skill that matters because it's the meta skill. There are a lot of skills that matter to be a functioning member of our society today. But you can't acquire any of them if you don't know how to learn effectively.
True.
And I would argue many of us learn today despite ourselves and despite the way we were taught or not taught to learn. Learning is this boring, scary, challenging thing for most people, and it doesn't have to be. When you discover how the world's most proficient learners learn, and I'm not talking about, fluffy mindset adjustments, although there are a lot of mindset adjustments to improving your learning. I'm talking about figuring out, okay, there are people today who can memorize a deck of cards in 13 seconds. They can memorize pi to 40,000 digits. Like, what are those people doing? And how do I do that when I want to learn a new language or a musical instrument, or I want to memorize, all the functions in a programming language? Like, why don't I just do what they're doing? And it turns out, study after study has actually demonstrated that if you look at the brains of these memory experts and people who are setting world records, their brains are actually not structurally different from yours. They don't have any genetic advantage. This is unlike the Olympics, where Michael Phelps, his arms are just longer than yours, and they're disproportionately long to his body, and therefore you'll probably never be faster than Michael Phelps in a pool.
Right.
But with memory, it's quite the contrary. These people all have normal brains. They're just using them in a different way, and that is causing their brains to adapt in a way that anyone else can. In fact, studies have shown that after about 6 weeks of training with the very same methods that I teach in my book, you can actually rewire your brain to look like the brain and act like the brain of a memory champion, which is pretty cool. In fact, the researcher who did that research, I had him on my show, a guy named Boris Nikolai Conrad, he was so inspired by this, he actually went out and won a memory championship himself. He's like, well, if anyone can do it, I can do it. And he did.
That's funny. That's funny. So then here comes, I guess, the $1 million question for a lot of people listening. Are entrepreneurs who choose not to, or maybe haven't chosen to, or are you just now awakening to the idea but haven't yet done or tried to practice these things, would you consider them to be at a disadvantage in some way? Hello there, entrepreneur. This is Jay Massey, and what I want to say to you is that the number one mistake that I have ever made in business, number one, has been waiting too long to do the books, waiting too long to get the bookkeepers, the accountants, the CPAs, the CFOs involved, and I don't want you to make that same mistake. That mistake cost me over 6 figures, and now for a significant discount, you have the ability to get your books together using FreshBooks. So what I want you to do is I want you to go over to gofreshbooks.com/cashflow diary. Again, that's gofreshbooks.com/cashflow diary. FreshBooks is the easy to use software designed to help you, the small business owner, the freelancer, get organized and save time on invoicing, getting paid faster, keeping those books in order so that it becomes a bonus for you to do your taxes as opposed to a burden. Go over to gofreshbooks.com/cashflow diary and get started today. And now let's get back to the rest of the story.
No, I mean, I always tell people, unless you are dropped on your head, you're not at a disadvantage. And then I actually had someone join one of my webinars. He's like, I actually was dropped on my head and I take offense. I was like, all right, let me rephrase. If you tied your shoes this morning, you're not at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
There's always going to be that fraction of a percent who actually has something very fundamentally wrong with their brain. But if you're listening to that podcast, that is not you, you're not at a disadvantage. That idea that, your brain becomes less plastic as you get older, it's kind of BS. I mean, sure, children learn faster, but there's research that shows that part of the reason they learn faster is because they have a lot more to learn, and everything is new and exciting to them and engaging.
Right.
There are example after example after example of people who learn well into old age just as proficiently. And the other thing I often think about, right, is like, okay, let's say they're at a disadvantage. Like, so what? Are you going to give up? Like, I've just told you, everyone in the audience, I can teach every single one of you how to memorize. Let's say you walk into a conference, right? I'll adapt this for your audience, Jay. They walk into a conference, right? We're all entrepreneurs. We pay to go to these expensive conferences. I spend tens of thousands of dollars a year to go to networking events. What if you walked in the room and just from the app, which you reviewed for an hour, on the flight, on the way to the conference, you'd already memorized the name and bio of every single person in the room? Do you think that would affect your bottom line, your ability to find people to joint venture with, collaborate with, sell to? Of course it would, right?
Absolutely.
So why not, right? And again, I want to stress, if you're that person who says, no, I have a lousy memory, you don't have a lousy memory. You just don't know how to use it.
So here's what keeps coming up for me as I continually listen to you, because I love efficiency. Anything that I can do more efficiently is always attractive to me. And this skill of learning and reading, etc., it's so fundamental to everything else that comes after it that's required. It reminds me of what the late Stephen Covey used to say regarding sharpening the saw, because there's one way to chop down a tree is just to grab the axe and start going, but if you spend a significant amount of time sharpening the saw before you start chopping down said tree, you can do it with less swings, which would suggest, I guess, the following question: why aren't we taught a better way of learning. I mean, you've been known to say that we're reading wrong. And I mean, there's just so much of it's like, just help me understand a little bit better.
Yeah, well, there's a couple reasons. I spend a lot of time thinking about this. The first one is our current education system hasn't been modified for a long time. I mean, long before we knew a fraction of what we know about the human brain. We didn't know a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about in 2014. You know, we're constantly discovering. Just as recently as 2017, scientists learned a whole new way about how the brain works and how it's tied to pictures and how memory is inextricable from location. So we're always discovering new stuff, and there is a lag before that gets distributed. Education, the way it is today, really hasn't changed in a couple thousand years. I mean, if someone went, you've probably heard this quote, right? If someone went back in time and brought Plato forward, or Socrates to today, literally the only thing that they would recognize, they wouldn't recognize the food on our plates, but they would recognize our classroom. And that's a problem. The other thing is a lot of the technique that we use, right? It's all based on visual mnemonics, this idea of creating pictures in your head that are novel, engaging, exciting. The ancient Greeks actually used this stuff. Right? So it is theorized that the Iliad and the Odyssey by Homer were committed long before. In fact, I have a quote in my book where Socrates actually denounces the use of writing. Right? So writing was not very popular among Greek philosophers. They felt that it softened the mind and that anything that you learned should be memorized. So where did this go? Where did these techniques? And they used the same technique, in fact, the memory palace technique, which is an advanced method for structuring these visual mnemonics, and that's how people win these world memory championships, is they put them into what's called a memory palace. That was invented by Simonides of Ceos 250 years before Christ. So what happened is a little murky and a little bit bizarre. It's widely thought that the Catholic Church may have suppressed a lot of this stuff. There were Catholic monks who were teaching this. Matteo Ricci was one of them. And another one of them was actually burned at the stake. Part of the issue is that when you create these visualizations in your mind, you're creating violent, bizarre, weird, sexual, really strange visualizations work the best. And the Catholic Church wasn't a fan.
No.
So that may have been part of the problem.
And I can see that. And there's the topic that we keep dancing around that I just want to make sure that I'm clear and we're coming from the same page, because we've said the words a couple of times, and I just want to make sure that there is some sort of distinction, or maybe there isn't from your perspective, because we've mentioned learning, and we've also mentioned the concept of memorizing, because there are times where, like, especially if I think about, our educational system, where it's more of a just regurgitate what you just read, and they consider that to, hey, cool, you passed the class, you learned something. Whereas for me, it seems to be, I don't believe we learn anything until we actually know how to use it in some way, shape, or form to society's benefit. So can you help me understand?
Yeah, I agree, and thanks for pointing that out. Here's the thing, right? Memory gets a super bad rap around, this idea of rote memorization, and there's a difference between memory and learning, and there is. And yet, you can't learn anything unless it's committed to memory, right? So there is an element of, and I talk about this a lot in the book, needing to be able to apply, right? Because simply regurgitating facts, there's a great apocryphal story about Max Planck, who won the Nobel Prize in physics and went around Europe giving this lecture on the new quantum mechanics. And his driver got so sick of hearing this lecture over and over and over and over again. He said, what if tomorrow in Munich, I give the lecture and you put on the driver's cap? And Max Planck says, yeah, sure, totally, give the lecture. He gives the lecture, flawless delivery, just regurgitates every piece of knowledge. Someone then in the front row asks a question, And the driver goes, I'm completely surprised to hear such a basic question from such an advanced city like Munich. I'm going to let my driver answer that one. So it's like, do you have driver level regurgitation or plank level understanding? And there is definitely something to be said about that, right? You need to be able to apply your knowledge, manipulate it, analyze information. But at the end of the day, there's no learning without memory. And if you can't first commit things to memory, you have no hopes of then going on to apply what you've learned.
Got it. Totally understood. Now, for those that have listened this far and want to find out more about what you've got going on, maybe even pick up a copy of the book, etc., what's going to be the best way for them to catch up with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. So everything I do is at superhumanacademy.com. And if people are interested in the book, I would love if you picked up a copy. It's only 197 pages. I worked for months to cut it down to the absolute bare minimum, and they can check that out at superhumanacademy.com/book.
Got it. Now, as we wind down, I've got a final question for you because I'm really curious to hear your answer on this one, because I think it's going to be a different than the hundreds of times I've asked it before in hearing something. So I'm expecting something unique. No pressure, but the individuals that have listened this far, they started in one way. They were in one mindset. Now they're at another, and they're at what I like to call the precipice of decision. It's that point where you go, yeah, okay, cool, that's it. Jonathan says I can learn, I'm learning. Or Jonathan, I can start that next business. I can make that next step. I can learn that language. I can become more than what I currently am. Now, like I know, Jonathan, that as a human being, when we make decisions like that and say things like that, we often have a companion. And that companion comes in the form of a voice. And that voice that reminds us of, well, it didn't work last time. And you know how many times you bought Rosetta Stone thinking you were actually going to learn something, but didn't, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And for some people, they are related to that voice. So my question to you is as follows. Let's pretend that this time it's going to be different. This time, they're actually going to follow through, and they're going to do exactly what you suggest, and they're going to do so in the next 24 to 48 hours. What would you suggest that they do?
Ooh, that's a tough question. I mean, we think about this a lot, and we've spent years refining our courses to make them as sticky as possible, to get people to finish, because we're competing against Facebook and Netflix, and it's not a competition you want to be in. And this is why we've started training certified coaches who will hold people accountable, because we realize some people just need someone to sit on their head and hold them accountable and set goals for them. But you know what? Why don't we make it simple? Because I believe if people experience this and they experience quick wins with this, they're going to want more. They're going to want to know what they can do. So I would love if everyone in the audience, very simply, tomorrow, in the next 24 hours, you are probably going to encounter 5 to 10 new people. You won't think that you will, but they'll be the bag boy at the supermarket, the Uber driver, the postman, whatever it is. I want you to look those people in the eye. I want you to introduce yourself, and I want you to listen to their name. When that name comes out, if it is Chris, I want you to imagine them on the cross like Jesus. If it's Mary, I want you to imagine them holding baby Jesus, because they're the Virgin Mary. If it is Mike, I want you to imagine them on stage at Coachella singing really bad karaoke, and on and on and on. I want you to create a visualization for each one of those people. And then, before you go to bed, I'm making this super easy for you guys. Before you go to bed, set yourself a little reminder on your phone to review. And I want you to see how many of those people that you remember. Then I want you to set another reminder for a week from now, if you're still on board, and see how many of those people you remember. And if that intrigues you, and you are keen to learn how to do that exponentially more powerfully, then hit me up.
I like it. I like it 100%. And I had a feeling it would be a unique answer. So that's really exciting for just everyone and what's possible, because being able to unlock that power, becoming as I often say, a bigger, better version of ourselves is part of what's necessary in order to go out there and provide value and services to the world in and of itself. I just want to say, Jonathan, I appreciate you taking the time, the dedication, and being willing to share what it is that you know, and sharing your knowledge, wisdom, and insight here with us today at the Cashflow Diary.
It's my pleasure, Jay. Thanks for having me.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you know what time it is. It's time for you to move at the speed of instruction. It's very clear what to do today. Because at the end of the day, you know that you heard something that intrigued you. Not only did it intrigue you, it intrigued me, and you heard that intriguedness going on. So what does that mean? That means get over to superhumanacademy.com. That means take on the exercise right now. Because yes, you will meet the additional new people today, but most importantly, it's really cool that you can prove it to yourself. And most importantly, get to the point to where you have the skills necessary to bring your idea to life. Ladies and gentlemen, nothing changes until you do. It's been fun talking to you guys today. I look forward to talking to you soon. Until next time.